Hello, this is Craig at Partner Staffing on the Bold Strong podcast. I'm excited today to have Treena Elliott with me, a longtime friend and co-worker. In this clip from the longer episode, we're going to be talking about resumes and what employers like to see on resumes and how you might make your resume a little better. So without further ado, let's jump to the show.
And I would say that engineers probably do this a lot too, where they work on one project beginning to end. Maybe the company where they're at doesn't have a project starting, but another company does, so they go and do that. So beginning to end. So with engineers specifically, because engineers are notorious for having excruciatingly long resumes. So a lot of times with engineers, I take their project work out and I put it on a separate document. So here's my career, and then here's my project work, so that it's really easy on the eye for a project manager or hiring manager to be like, okay, this is where this individual's worked. Okay, this is all the projects that they've worked on from beginning to end.
Right. I think that brings up an interesting point where we see, and engineers are a good example, but it's across the board where we see people on their resumes, they feel this need to write down every single thing that they ever did in every job. And then instead of saying, I did this role and here are the 5 main things I did, they get excruciatingly into the detail. And nobody's really reading that, I don't think. Maybe you, but like once you see that, like there's no way. The reality is if you look at 15 line items for a single job, there's no way you're even doing that stuff all the time. Like it's just a small part of the career. And so hopefully it comes out in the interview, but you don't need to list everything.
Well, and that's interesting because I tell people when I'm chatting with them on the phone about doing their resume, well, number one, we've never been taught how to do a resume, right? Like, I talk to clients, literally CEOs and C-suite people who come to work with me on their resume. They're like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about my resume or how to do a resume since that one class they talked about it for 1 hour in university. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. And I'm like, so people at a really high level. So I see C-suite resumes that are formatted and look exactly the same as a new grad because we don't know. So, so my second point with that is I also see people on resumes just copy and paste their job description onto their resume.
Right.
To the point where I've seen and other duties as required.
Oh my goodness, that is awesome. I love that.
And like really senior level people, but you can't fault them, right? Like we don't know. And so because again, I've spent so much time looking at resumes, it's like I just want to know your impact in that role. I don't need to know what you did. I can read your job and see mechanical engineer. Okay, well, you were a mechanical engineer, right? But what was your impact? What did you catch a big error that you fixed on a project? So just like getting to the punch of it, like what are you really good at, and where do you make an impact?
Yeah, what matters? What about you mentioned and other duties as required. What about putting in hobbies and stuff at the end, or other interests, or like how do you layer that in, or do you ever?
I totally do. And I get some pushback on there. So when I do someone's resume, I send them a questionnaire. And then one of the questions that I have is, tell me about you. What do you like to do? What's your favorite kind of food? What's your favorite dish? And I say the reason I put that on there is because I usually write a blurb on people's resume on the second page near the end that's an about me, that says, oh, Treena, I'm hard for me to think on the spot with this one, but Treena loves like Hawaiian pizza. There's no shame in pineapple on pizza, right? Because that's like a funny debate. And it might seem a little cheesy, and if it doesn't resonate with people, then I leave it off. But the reason that I leave it on and don't just have a list of words like under, on my resume, I would never say like interest, pizza, wine, blah, 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 but like a little bit of a story, because I think that resumes are a good storytelling tool. And the reason that I put a little blurb about, you know, your actual interest with some character is because it finds commonality, right? Like, how often have you been in an, it's a great icebreaker. So
Yeah.
let's say, for example, someone's meeting me for the first time and they see on my resume that they like that I like pineapple pizza and they hate pineapple pizza. Well, isn't that a fun banter? Or
Right.
like, let's say right now with hockey, if someone's a Flames fan interviewing an Oilers fan, well, then you're instantly getting into some banter so that the interview flows a little bit nicer. So I do it as an icebreaker more than anything.
Right.
And I keep it small.
What's the worst one? Have you ever had a bad one on a resume you've had to deal with? I have
Like
one.
a bat.
Terrible.
Oh, no.
So the worst one I ever had was I had someone applied and the last line in their resume was other interests, and one of them was partying on weekends.
Oh.
Wow. Thank you that it's only on weekends. But yeah.
Right. Well, and someone might put on their resume that they like, you know, entertaining entertaining with wine at their house. Well, that's
Yeah,
fun.
that's
So
different.
they like to host parties. So,
That's
I mean,
sure.
that's maybe like, you know, a young person, and if someone wanted to put that on their resume, I might say that you enjoy, you know, you're a social person that likes being around other people.
Yeah, there's a better way
So,
to better
that's
spin.
the better way.
Yeah, a little bit better spin. So yeah, yeah. Okay, well, yeah, and I guess I have always thought that there is a roundedness to the hobbies piece, but I felt too that as soon as it got too much, like as soon as your hobbies started to exceed your employment background, then it starts to be a little nutty. So like keep it to a couple lines and you don't have to overdo it. So
And that's, I'm like, don't just make a list of things, like have a little bit of interest in it, because it just adds personality. It helps tell the story. You know, maybe you coach your kids soccer, and maybe the person that's about to interview, maybe they coach soccer too. You have that in common. Almost all, like, really, that's the point of that, is we almost always have one thing in common with every person. So if you have an opportunity to catch that on a resume, be like, oh, because sometimes people will put, you know, the last book they read.
right.
Well, maybe you read that book too, and maybe you talk about that for 5 minutes. So you're just connecting and building a rapport with a person before you start talking about your experience. And don't we all like to work with people that we get along with and can have good conversation with?
Yeah.
So that's why I do that.
Yeah.